Ancient Egypt, the true light of the world. Part 1, let's begin. Before we ask who built Egypt, we must ask who migrated to Egypt and stood behind Egypt. The Greek and classical record points south, to Ethiopia, the land of blacks. Later, colonial geography called that world Libya, Western Sudan, Morinland, Nigritia, Negroland, and the oldest nation in the world became the Royal Niger Company before she was renamed again Nigeria. The names changed, but the river corridor remained: Niger, Benue, Lake Chad, Shari, and the Nile source world. Before Greece had philosophers, before Rome became an empire, before Europe emerged from the shadows of its tribal age, ancient writers were already speaking of a mighty civilization south of Egypt. They called it Aethiopia. Not the modern political country people think of today, but a vast African world beyond Egypt, a land of dark peoples, mighty rivers, gold, iron, temples, priesthoods, astronomy, navigation, and sacred knowledge. Long before modern historians rewrote the ancient world, the earliest witnesses preserved fragments of a different memory. The Phoenician historian Sanchoniathon spoke of ancient priesthoods, divine civilizations, sacred knowledge systems, and the origins of the Old World before the rise of Greece. The Egyptian priest Manetho wrote that Egypt passed through ancient dynasties stretching back into remote antiquity long before the Greeks entered history. The Greek historian Herodotus described the Egyptians and Ethiopians as deeply connected peoples and stated that many customs of Egypt came from the Ethiopians. Diodorus Siculus went even further, writing that the Ethiopians considered themselves the first among men and that the Egyptians were originally colonists sent out from Ethiopia. Read that carefully. Not Europeans, not Greeks, not Rome. The ancient writers themselves repeatedly pointed south of Egypt. Strabo described the ancient connections between Egypt and the interior lands of Africa. Homer, in the Iliad and Odyssey, spoke of the Ethiopians as a people beloved by the gods living at the edges of the known world, divided by the great rivers. Centuries later, Gerald Massey argued that many of the religious systems later associated with Greece, Rome, and even biblical traditions had far older roots in Egypt and Inner Africa. This was not mythology alone, geography tells the story too. Because when we examine Africa carefully, the Nile, the Niger, the Benue, Lake Chad, the caravan systems of the Sudan Belt, and the ancient trade corridors across the continent begin to show an outline of an older African world, a connected civilization zone. Long before colonial borders existed, before the name Nigeria was invented, before Europe divided Africa with lines on maps, the rivers already existed. The trade routes existed, the metallurgy existed, the priesthoods existed, the astronomy existed, the sacred systems existed. Gold, silver, ivory moved through these lands. Pottery, terracotta, bronze, iron moved through these lands. Knowledge moved through these lands. British historian Flora Shaw herself, the woman associated with the naming of Nigeria, wrote about the ancient links between the Western Sudan, the Niger regions, Hausaland, and the Nile world. The deeper historians looked, the more they encountered traces of an older African continuity stretching far into antiquity. And at the northern gate of this greater African civilization stood Egypt. Before we ask who built Egypt, we must ask who stood behind Egypt. Over time, the names changed. Ethiopia became fragmented into smaller labels: Libya, Sudan, Guinea, Morinland, Nigritia, Negroland, Nigeria. But the rivers remained, and memory survived in fragments, in the writings of Herodotus, in the records of Diodorus, in the dynasties of Manetho, in the fragments of Sanchoniathon, in the research of Gerald Massey, in the oral traditions of Africa itself. Before we can understand ancient Egypt, we must first understand the greater African world from which Egypt emerged. If the pyramids were destructible or movable, they won't be standing there today. We swim in a great ocean of truth. And beyond these first waters lie ancient rivers waiting to reveal their secrets, mighty waterways that carried gold, iron, priesthoods, trade, migration, and civilizations across Africa long before modern borders existed. In Episode 2, we journey into the rivers of Ethiopia, the arteries of civilization, before we delve into who built the pyramids, with what science, because Ethiopia and Nigeria, the one and only true cradle of humanity, remembers. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.